Hi, everybody. My name is Alan Sallinger, and I'm one of the engineers here over at Superconductive. Superconductive is the company behind Great Expectations. It's a data tool that allows you to basically see what's in your data and get to know if there's any drift and set expectations for what you want in your data. And it's super helpful. So a quick agenda, just intro, who we are, what we're doing, what is Great Expectations, and then a live drive-through of the Great Expectations tutorial, and then some like Q&A and some other things that we have in the works. With us, I thought we were only gonna have a couple of engineers, but it turns out we have a lot now. We have Alex, Will, looks like there was Tal, Anthony, Chathan, and I think some others are joining as well. They can be helpful for questions as well throughout this process too. And so with Superconductive, our mission is to revolutionize the speed and integrity of data collaboration. And the way that we are doing that is through Great Expectations. As data projects get larger, the cost and complexity go up, but we're hoping that with tools such as like Great Expectations that we're building out, that we can minimize that so that you can get the most out of your data, especially as your organization uses them more. So I will go into the live demo now, if everybody's all right with that. So to begin, you need to make sure that you have Great Expectations installed. That is as simple as just doing a pip install Great Expectations. I already have that though. So let's confirm that it is there. And it is. So beyond that though, to go through our tutorial, we'll clone down the GE tutorials repo. And the start of any Great Expectations project is making sure that you have a data context put into play, and a data context is just like basically the data management for your Great Expectations project, and it like wraps around what data you're going to be using. So in order to make that, you would just run Great Expectations init. Sorry. API init. So a new API. And this will basically provide the base structure for the project. So let's take a peek at that. It will create you all of these folders right here, or the directory, and then what's below that. Most of it is, most of the configuration can be found here in this Great Expectations file. This is just a bare bones one. There's not much in here, but as we go through the steps, we will see more put in here. So after we have a context put together for our project, next thing that we need to do is actually like connect to our data. So inside of our GE tutorials project, you will see a data folder. And inside of the data folder, we have this yellow cab taxi data from 2019 that we use for like the basis of a lot of like our tutorials here. The first file is for like the January data, and the second one is for the February data. We treat like the January data as like the sample we want to look at and like as our source of truth, and then we compare that against the February data where there's a couple of things that are a bit amiss. So from there, we need to actually create the data source. And most of the Great Expectations API is done through specifying like the noun object that you want to use, and then like a verb that's around it to put it together. So for this one, we're going to be going off of files in our file system, like pandas files. It's those CSVs that we have. We're going to be processing with pandas, and then our path is to that data directory that we have. And a cool thing is it'll open up some nice little interactive Jupyter notebooks that we have here. So in here, we will initialize our context, which is the base block that we use for like operating with GE. We name our data source, and we will configure it right here. This configuration then gets written into that greatexpectations.yaml file. We test make sure it's like proper, and then we will save it, and then we can see that it's all there. So we'll run all of these. Port named, we have a nice little printout of it here. All right, our data source come together, and then we can actually see our data source. You can also, after this, we can delete that guy and we can take a look. And so if we do, if we start listing them, we can actually see it through the API as well. There. Then we can also see our data source has been appended to our greatexpectations.yaml file. Okay. And now that we actually have a data source, we can start creating a expectation suite. Expectations are what Great Expectations is all based off of. It allows you to define what you expect out of your data, or you can also have profilers run that will give you some baseline expectations for your data. So let's start doing that now. So that'll be the same thing, Great Expectations, the V3 API, and we'll make a new suite. And GUI will ask us a couple of questions. And in this one, I'm going to use the profiler that we have to get some base level expectations for us. I'm going to select our January data, and I'll call it taxi.demo for what our expectation suite will be. Should have probably asked this earlier, but can everybody actually see the terminal, or should I increase the size on it?
I can see it just fine.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so inside of here, we will need to run these commands in order to actually like initialize the expectation suite. However, with the API that we have, it will generate like the baseline for us. So again, initializing a data context this time, we select a batch of our data. We have like 10,000 records in that suite, but with the batch, we're just taking a chunk of the data that we want to run against. We have our suite name here, validator to connect them together, and column names. And this will show the top portions of them. Down here, we're able to select columns that we want to ignore for the profiler running against. So in this case, we only want the profiler to run against our passenger count to start us off. The profiler gets instantiated here, and then we will have it invoked down here and a checkpoint created. So I'm going to run these guys now. And it will pull up our expectation suite. But what we're seeing right here, this is our what we call data docs. Data docs is a visual representation of the expectation suites and also the results that we get from running our expectations. So in here, all of these expectations were actually created for us by that profiler. It takes a peek at your data and it will make some like general expectations for you. This one I put together 11 for us. So it gets the min values, max values, the mean of them. It shows that the number of passengers that we need are in a set. So there's between 1 and 6 passengers for all of the taxi rides. And it ensures that none of them are null. Okay. So from there, if we want to start comparing then using this expectation that we have built out against our February data, what we would do is we would make a checkpoint and have the expectation sweep point and run against that February data. So I will close this guy out and then we can take a look at it or make one. But first, if we go over here, we should also be able to see our expectation, or sorry, we'll be able to see our expectations that get built out into JSON for us. And that was generated for us by our profiler. So here I will create a new endpoint or checkpoint, sorry. And we'll do that again through the v3 API that we have, the object name that we want, and we'll call it my new checkpoint. So again, initializes a context. Down here, we'll be adding a checkpoint into our expectations.config. Here, it's automatically using the data asset name that we had before, which was our January data. We'll swap this to be the February data, though. You'll see all of our data asset names. Then we'll be able to see all of our expectation suite names after that. We'll actually create an instantiation of the checkpoint. And we'll add the checkpoint to our data context. And then down here, once this gets run, we will be able to run our checkpoint, and then we will be able to see it in our data docs. So I'll run all these. So as we can see, we had our first validation here, and this all passed. But then when we look at we have our first expectation suite that we ran there. But then we take a peek and we see that something's a little bit amiss here compared to the expectation suite that we ran before. This data set that we had didn't actually pass all the expectations that we had for the data. Because in this February data set, it looks like it has a couple fields that aren't quite right in what we were expecting. And one of those is actually that the passenger count field had 0 values in it. Whereas for like a taxi, that's sort of odd, right? Because in order for it to run actually like paid, there usually has to be a user or a writer. And you can see that it happened in about 15, almost 16% of the rows now. So that's a baseline of great expectations and getting your first set of expectation suites done, connecting to a data context, adding your data source and your first checkpoint and your first expectation suite. This is like bare bones and really guided along through our tutorial process. But there's other things that we can add from here to actually make it like production ready. You can have different backend stores. You can host your data docs in other places, so you can actually collaborate with your teams. Yeah, is there any questions?
We had one in the chat, which was about
right.
expectations being predefined, and are they fixed or selectable? So maybe just kind of how do you customize expectations? What do you do if it auto generates some you don't like, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. So the auto generation stuff, that doesn't have to happen at all. So that is based off of a profiler that we have. So you could have manually set in any expectations you want. So in here, you can actually go and like edit your expectation suite, and I'll tell you that you can go in here and then run this guy in order to actually start messing around with your expectations. Also, yeah, so there's no predefined set. And if you wanted to edit any of those, you can then go under that expectations directory and start editing them in here. The really cool feature of Great Expectations is there are a lot of pre-built expectations that you can invoke. So if you go onto our site, you can take a look at what we have called the Glossary of Expectations. Sorry. And that could be found here. I haven't built out any custom ones myself yet. Alex, is there any custom expectations, or team, is there any custom expectations that you guys have seen that are quite useful for you?
There's a lot in our hackathons. People have built geography-based custom expectations, like proximity to a zip code to determine weather conditions. There have been a lot of accounting type of expectations with a domain of accounting focus in healthcare to do some expectation on filling in health records, and also on administrative things like social security numbers, pattern checking, phone numbers. So people have developed a lot. Also, in terms of contributions, there's some statistical expectations that people have contributed. It's designed to enable this kind of addition contribution.
So a question, can they handle regular expressions? Definitely. I think that some of the ones that Alex was just talking about pattern matching for phone numbers or zip codes, things like that. Some of those are built with regular expressions. And yeah, there's one right there. Expect column values to match regex. There's a few of them that are related to that. Right.
Yeah, and if you want, it is an open source project. You can, number one, make your own custom expectations for yourself. But if you find something super useful, please contribute. Other people might like to use it as well.
So I had a question from Matt, which I'm pretty sure is what kicked off the whole, hey, let's try and get Superconductive to come and talk to us about trying to compare this to DBT. And I don't know if you all are in a position to do that comparison, but hopefully this is at least helpful so far. But thoughts on advantage of Great Expectations if we have DBT and unit testing? And if you're not as familiar with the DBT side, any other thoughts on, like, if you've got unit testing on your data pipelines, like where does Great Expectations fit in maybe?
Anthony, I think you might have touched on something like this before.
A little bit, yeah. And I don't know if Tala's still on the call. I might have some good context, but I'm just looking at the DBT test here a little bit, and I think some of the benefits here is, so with DBT you can run like SQL, get the rows that match or don't match, like a condition in a where clause. We go a little bit further and we can do column aggregate metrics like the statistical expectations that Alex was talking about, that I think would be pretty difficult to do using that framework.
We've had projects where we had a combination of Airflow, DBT, and Great Expectations working in concert. There's some really neat use cases. Obviously, for SQL, we actually in those projects use DBT for unit testing, and then we added Great Expectations for like more expansive, like domain-specific testing, not just on the column uniqueness, kind of database specific. And so DBT obviously is a database, data warehouse specific, and Great Expectation has the declarative syntax where you just saw in the glossary, which say expect this and that applies to plurality of backends like Snowflake, Spark, Pandas, if your projects are not very large.
I think just to build on that a little bit, there's where the files live. They don't have to live in a database necessarily. There can be CSVs in S3 and in like in Google Cloud Storage, and so it becomes a much more general. Well, it can integrate in a more general way. And so depending on where your data is and what state it is, what shape it is, there's some advantages there as well.
So tag on that too, the expectations themselves don't necessarily have to live in the same place as your code. Those can live in a central repository or a S3 bucket or other stores, so that you can have other people access and change the expectations without having to change the actual code of your pipeline. Yeah. And then
in the project I mentioned is that multiple pipelines were together. There was Snowflake workload, and then going into it was EMR, Spark workload, and the same expectations, entering the same expectations repository was driving the source of truth for your data quality for all of those.
Matt, what do you mean by auto scheduling? Do you mean like running these like on a daily, just to ensure there's no like data drift over time, or anything in particular?
Really, so we don't have to self-host code, especially I'm on like the BizOps side, and for there the goal is no code.
So we actually have a cloud project in the works. That was more of like follow on after Q&A, but yeah, that's what we're currently working on, so that we can host and run the expectations for you. And then you go up to a nice web page specific to you, and you'll be able to check it all out.
Awesome.
And if anybody's interested in getting on the beta list, if you ping me in our Slack room, I can get you in contact with our go-to-market team, and we could hopefully get you set up in queue on that.
Which Slack channel do I ping you on?
It would be the Great Expectations Slack.
Sounds good. I will find you there.
Cool. Thank you.
So just so everyone knows, so I think if you go to greatexpectations.io, is it like right there front and center how to sign up? Okay. Not that I've gone there recently to write up the the short description here. We got a few other questions in the chat. Let me try and throw them at you and see what you got. So the Parag's asking, is there ability to impute missing values, which I believe we're talking about actually changing the data itself based on what you're seeing? That was sort of a question in case Parag wants to.
Yeah, is it only about expectations only, or can you also overcome some of the expectations that have not been met, like missing values, imputing values, and so on?
Alex, just confirm our expectation just running against the data. We don't have anything that's going out and mutating their data at all, correct?
I mean, this is the design principle that the founders followed from early on. Everything runs in the engine. So if you have a big Snowflake deployment or big Databricks deployment, only control, expectations, and orchestration of what will get validated is in Python. The rest is delegated to the engine, and results are stored as indicated. And we actually are really, really fussy about maintaining this, because some of the users, the large companies, when they run, they couldn't do it if anything ran. They're like that particular DBT project I mentioned, the instances were really small. It's just a regular run-of-the-mill Amazon instance just to run. Everything else is running in the background. It's a must. Nobody would use it otherwise.
Okay. Another question we had is, how would you handle schema changes? Any tips on? I assume we're talking if the data schema is changing. How do you kind of keep these things up to date?
We have a few expectations around columns and also types of columns. So you can set some expectations on, I expect my columns to be in this order with these names and these types. And then when your schema changes, you'd get some alerts and some failing tests. So you would have to update both in tandem to keep that in sync.
Yeah, If I can add on to that, because I asked that question, like what if some of the source data is from like a NoSQL and we just have people kind of changing schema, like again, is there, other than just like going in there, I'm just trying to make sure I have a good picture of this use case. And like it sounds like, because you'd only want to use this on the most expensive stuff, then of course you'd want to change the schema, but there's no like way to kind of make it more flexible if needed during a specific time that you know things are going to be changing.
Not sure if this will answer your question, but let me take a stab. There are a few like I forget exactly what the name of the expectation is, but like expect that my columns are in the set. So what you could do there is do something a little more open-ended, where you can say, I expect to at least have these columns or these fields in your data set, and that way you could lock down things that you don't expect to change, and then allow some amount of flexibility for new columns that get added. Another thing that we have is a keyword on a lot of our expectations called mostly. So you can say, I expect to have 50% of my records to have this column, or to have this type of data, or for the data to be in this format, or the values to be in this value set. And then you can set that mostly parameter to be a little bit more open-ended there.
Thank you.
Would there be a way to say like we're seeing this column or attribute for the first time? I think that required saving state over time, so it's kind of interesting. Do you know about that?
We do have a project that is work in progress on time series. What you're talking about, things changing over time. There's been some germination of that. When we talked in Alan's example, getting a batch of data, well, you can get a list of batches of data. You can, let's say, take the taxi data set over several months and analyze patterns. And then, so that's a lot of things that need to be done before it reaches perfection. But certain things have already been laid in there. It's ongoing. We can get a hold of multiple batches. We can look at certain things in between. And if you have some pattern that's of interest for your work, we'd love to hear about it, so that when we work on it, we target the use case. But the fundamental capability of retrieving multiple batches and seeing how data changes over time, how it drifts, columns appearing, disappearing, the foundation of that is in the platform. But it's like it's still a lot more to be done there.
Okay, cool. And if we have more time after this, Benjamin, you want to talk more about your use case, we could always talk through that a little bit. A few more questions from the chat I'll throw out there. Norman is asking, are users contributing templates for domains? So like a medical research template of expectations, sales analytics, etc. You see anything like that?
So I mean, we do have like sort of a big medley of like users have submitted a bunch of geospatial expectations. There is a plan in the not too distant future to organize some hackathons around some like specific verticals. So one for medical, one for geospatial. So if you're interested in participating in something like that, definitely get in touch with us in our Slack, because we would love to have you there.
And then did you see Matt's last couple questions? One about is anyone using it for automated SOX controls, and also just how well does it work with JSON, which I think we kind of talked about, but if there's anything else to add there.
I mean, personally, having worked in the past in regulatory compliance software for SOX and NASDAQ regulations and FERC energy, I'd love to see domain experts develop expectations for that. Nothing preventing, we just haven't done it, but certainly a great opportunity.
Okay. And then as far as working with JSON data, sound like there's certainly some capabilities there. Is that are there a lot of expectations that wouldn't work with JSON data, or is that pretty well supported across the board? What would you say about that?
There are expectations that look at JSON, and JSON is kind of central to the platform. Don't know anything, especially if there's like specific logic on JSON that's needed.
I'd probably picture the place that platforms tend to struggle is when you get into like nested JSON schemas versus just a pretty flat tabular looking JSON.
Shouldn't be fundamental. We'll see. I mean, it really depends on what's packaged. I don't think fundamentally there should be anything preventing a deep JSON dictionary like a giant tree. But what's packaged in the specific, I don't know, we have like 5,000 of expectations, a little more. If it's packaged for what's required by your use case or not, I don't know, but it can be done.
Cool. So there's a good chance you can do it, dig in and take a look. Don't shy away because it's JSON or something besides a SQL database. Obviously, we talked about that already. Cool. Other questions for the superconductive crew about Great Expectations?
Yeah, I see some distributional functions, but are there like more statistical functions, like to say, okay, this column needs to have normal distribution or other kinds of distribution?
This is a great question. Somebody is developing like Pearson coefficient expectation because he needs it. To me, it's like another favorite topic. If you have something in mind, maybe like you can do it together. We can help you like and learn how to work with the platform and then things like this. We do have some things that work with parameter estimation, but so much more can be done. I mean, the dream set is really wide. You can then go into finely quantized data, and we don't have that today. So ideally, as was mentioned, I think Tal mentioned these upcoming hackathons, would love to have one dedicated to things that are more statistical and not structured data as well as one of the themes.
Got it. Thanks.
Cool. Benjamin, you got a question?
Yeah. This is a broad question, I guess, but with a tool like Great Expectations, I mean, it seems very useful for data consistency, and I'm sure there's a lot of other use cases. Who do you guys feel like, who do you feel like is your general target business size like audience? And kind of like a side question is like, when do you think is like the ideal time to add in a tool like this to grow it into the team and the business?
I can answer the second question. Maybe somebody else who knows more about the businesses themselves can answer the first part. But for the second part, and this is like hands-on experience, just like unit testing is established now, we've worked with our clients to introduce data testing as part of the dev loop. And so Great Expectations will be set up as part of the process. And before the code is accepted, the data tests would be run as well. And the expectations will be committed to GitHub as the plan of record of what is meant for data to have expected level of quality. So for that, normal dev teams of the normal size are all can benefit from it because you can't do data testing on small data sets. You need to do it more realistically and plug it in to the CI/CD pipeline. And in terms of which companies want it or not, I mean, they all should want it. The question is maybe giant companies already developed their internal tools. Like we know that Intuit had one similar idea way back when for themselves. You'd expect big companies that employ machine learning, they must have had data quality as well. We do it for everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of brought out one of the interesting points when you brought up unit testing. I find it interesting, like to have a project that's fairly large or medium size, let's say medium size to large. And let's say the engineers never wrote unit tests as an example. So there's going to be a large cost to integrate this versus starting at the beginning. So that's kind of, this is kind of like the general area I wanted to ask around.
There's definitely the idea of like building good habits early, and also definitely feeling free to like start with just a few expectations, just to kind of have that running in your pipeline, validate like the most important critical things that you need. And then as more mistakes are going to pile in, like you're going to discover some things that weren't quite the way you expect, you add more expectations, you commit that, you add that to your pipeline. So yeah, definitely starting early and starting small seems like a great approach if that's possible.
Thank you.
All right, and then Rob had a question. I don't know if you want to unmute Rob, if you want me to call it out here. I'll go for it because I can't see your little box. So Rob's asking, how far are we from using this for validating micro batches and streaming systems? Any thoughts on what that would look like? I second this question. That's a great question. So I think where we're getting at is, could you like run expectations on every micro batch as it's streaming in, or do you need realistically to kind of wait till it's landed?
Yeah, like you would process run a stream process on a window or something of that sort. Like, can you is there a way we could look at, and this maybe kind of goes along with time series and the focus on time series, just thinking if we took sort of that same concept and applied it to adjusting windows in the streaming system, and is there a lot to add to get there, or is there some foundation that's laid?
I've heard whispers, but I think we're not quite there yet. Like it's in the works, or it's on the roadmap, but it's not coming in the immediate future.
Got it. Okay.
I think that being said, our concept of a data asset or a batch is pretty flexible. So you could use, your individual streaming batches. You could validate each one of those as they come in. There's, not specific tooling, but there's nothing stopping you from using it.
Okay, I think we'll move on to group discussions in just a moment here. Any last questions or important thoughts someone wants to share on Great Expectations before we transition?
I guess just on our side, we are hiring. We're looking for a whole bunch of roles. So if you would like to come work with us, you're interested at all, if you go to superconductive.com or .io, we have positions there. Also, it's an open source project. If you got some free times on your hand, or you have something that looks interesting you want to add, please do. Love contributions. You even get a free coffee mug with your PR number and your GitHub handle on it when you make your first come in contribution there. So, it's always great too, right?
Cool. Or if you just want to keep talking to these cool guys on Slack, sounds like you can jump into Great Expectations Slack. Keep that going.
That is true.
Appreciate the presentation. Appreciate answering all the questions and hanging out. You all, anyone who wants, is welcome to hang out for some group discussions here, and we'll see where that goes. But thanks again, Alan and crew.